All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call, please.
Veranda,
Here.
Castroville,
Here.
County of Monterey,
Here.
Delray Oaks,
Here.
Marina Coast,
Here.
Monterey,
Here.
Big Grove, Salinas,
Here.
Sand City, here, Seaside.
Here.
Have a quorum.
Thanks, Jay. With that, we will kick off with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll ask our supervisor here to kick us off. That was the reason.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
After 1 inch should always do the.
All right, 4 additions to agenda. Any additions?
No additions.
Board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. 5 is approval of agenda.
So move.
Second. And seconded, take it out to the public. Anybody in the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, bring it back to the board. Motion and approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Going on to item 6, election of board officers. Do I pass it directly to Scott? Perfect.
Yes.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you. Board Member Donaldson, thank you so much for chairing the committee. I'll pass it to you for your report.
All right, thank you. Yes, the committee met, which consisted of myself, Director Moore, and Director Carbone. After thoughtful and careful consideration, we unanimously recommended that Director Williamson continue as the chair. With that, I'll accept any additional nominations if there are any out there. Okay, seeing none, I'll close all the nominations and we'll vote to select our 2026 board chair. All those or actually I'll accept a nomination.
I'd like to make a motion for both those candidates that were referred to.
Second.
Okay, and we'll talk about the vice chair next. We have
Second the motion.
we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Maybe we should maybe go out to the public real quick on this one.
All right. Take it out to the public. Any members of the public? Chai, do you see anybody?
Don't see any raised hands in the boardroom or online.
Okay. Motion passes. Congratulations, Director Williamson. The next item that we took into consideration, the nomination committee, was for vice chair. Also, in that case, we reached a unanimous recommendation, and that was for Director Herbino. And so with that, I'll accept if there are any additional nominations for board vice chair. All right, seeing none, I'll close those nominations for board vice chair and accept a motion.
So move.
All right, I have a second. We have a motion and a second. I'll send it out to the public. Any public comment?
Don't see any raised hands from the public.
Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Congratulations, Director Herbino, for vice chair. And with that, I'll send it back to the chair.
Awesome. Thank you, Director Johnson. With that, we'll move on to item 7, public comments. This is an opportunity for folks to speak to the board on anything not on today's agenda. So for folks online, you can use the raise hand function. Not seeing anybody in the room. Give another second here for folks online. All right. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Move on to item 8, consent agenda. Anybody wish to pull anything? Is there a motion to approve consent?
Move to approve consent.
Second.
Moved and seconded. We'll take it out to the public. Anybody in the public wish to pull anything from consent or make a comment on any consent items? All right, seeing none, bring it back to the board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. That will move on to item 9, committee reports. 9A is Budget Personnel Committee. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from February?
Second.
So moved and seconded. Take it out to the public. Nobody in the public wish to speak on this item. All right, seeing none, bring it back to the board. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And then 9B is Recycled Water Committee. Looking for a motion to adopt the minutes from February 12th meeting.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Take it out to the public. All right, seeing none, bring it back to the board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. With that, we'll move on to item 10A. It's our one action item for this evening is consider providing direction to staff on the proposed wastewater rate structures between fiscal years 26-27 and 2030-31. With that, I'll pass it to Paul.
Thank you, Chair Williamson. So this is the first of a few presentations you'll be hearing over the next few months at board meetings. As you know, we hired Will Dan as our consultant to do the rate structure and cost allocation study and rate study, cost allocation, and rate structure study. This first item that Lawrence and Will Dan will be going over is looking at what rate structures we could move to, what are viable, what are justifiable within the law. In the coming months, we'll also do the rate revenue discussion, which will probably be in March, on what do we need to sustain not just our operations, but also the capital improvement projects that we have planned for the next 10 years. This is all in a schedule that's intended to get us to our Prop 218 date, which, if the board wishes to increase rates and for however many years, that we would send that out for consideration, all within the limits of Prop 218. So with that as a backdrop of what you have before you for the next 3-4 months, I was going to turn it over to Lawrence to get into this specific item.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and President of the Board. My name is Don Shu, Director of Finance with Monterey Water. I'll give a short introduction. In July 2021, the Board approved a 5-year wastewater service charge and rate increase effective August 2021 through June 2026. And this is the final year of the Prop 218 wastewater rate increase. And after a request for proposal in August 2025, Wilton Financial Service was selected to conduct a review of the current wastewater rate structure to determine the revenue requirements to fund the operation and maintenance, capital improvement program, and to build a reserve to sustain the long-term financial stability of this agency. With that, I turn over to Wilton. Chris Fisher, who is the principal in charge of this project, and he's going to do a presentation on the wastewater rate study.
Thanks, Lawrence. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. And I assume I'm going to let you know when to advance slides. So as Lawrence said, I'm Chris Fisher with Wildan Financial Services. And along with my colleagues, Alice and Michael, we've been working with Paul and Lawrence and others since about October, going through a great deal of data gathering, analysis, and development of a model. And as Lawrence also, or Paul also mentioned, we're also working with Monterey One on the cost allocation plan. We're not talking about that tonight, but I'm also the principal overseeing that work with my colleague, Tony Thrasher. So go ahead and go to the first slide.
Looks like we're having some difficulties, Chris.
Nope, it's all right.
We'll get there.
There we go. So just very quickly, very brief background for those who haven't heard this before. Wildan Financial Services is a financial consulting firm that has been providing a wide range of revenue, economic, and financial fiscal studies to public agencies throughout the country, but especially in California for almost 40 years now. And you see just some of the areas of work where we focus, and two of those that we are working with Monterey. One is the cost allocation plan area and the utility rate area, but you also see some other work we do with impact fees and special districts and fiscal and economic feasibility studies and bond compliance. We've been working in California, like I said, for almost 30 years on utility rate studies up and down the state. We've worked with many of the agencies around the Monterey Peninsula, Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, and even Southern Bay Area on cost allocation plan and different types of fee studies and utility rate studies all over the Bay Area and Northern California. Go ahead. So just a quick overview of the study structure and process in general. The two key objectives, one, and kind of mentioned previously, to gather a lot of financial data, validate all that data, develop a model and analysis to first evaluate the current financial condition of the utility, and then develop a series of 5-year projections using all of that data to forecast the utility's ability to meet obligations for maintenance and operations and ongoing routine repair and replacement of aging system components, other major capital projects, fund reserves, designated reserves based on policy objectives and goals, and pay back any existing debt and forecast, to the extent needed, any future debt, and wrap all that up in a series of, again, a 5-year projection to address really the first component of the rate study, which is the revenue requirement analysis, which is what it sounds like. It's developing an analysis to determine how much revenue Monterey One Water needs in order to take care of all those financial requirements and meet all the fiscal objectives. And then based on that analysis and all of those costs that make up that revenue requirement, conduct a cost of service analysis where we bucket all those costs up into functional categories and then allocate those costs out to customers in a way that reflects their proportionate cost of service. And then based on that cost of service analysis, transition into the development of customer rates that ultimately are charged to Monterey One Water customers to collect the revenues necessary to meet that revenue requirement. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about rate design and some of the direction we were given to look at different rate structures. Then we'll talk about each of those in some detail and then wrap that up with some questions and discussion. So go ahead. Excuse me. So based on conversations with Monterey One staff and during a number of meetings and discussions, we were asked to look at 3 approaches to developing customer rates for wastewater service. One structure built on using building square footage to calculate or as a basis for the rates. One using plumbing fixture units, and then a third using volumetric wastewater usage or discharge. Next slide, please. To evaluate each of these structures, we kind of use 3 criteria to determine, their usefulness or feasibility or whatever term you want to assign to that. One was the ability of each of those approaches to align with how wastewater is discharged or put into the system by different users, and how well these different approaches align with that discharge and those characteristics. Second, how administratively feasible are either of these or any of these 3 approaches? Meaning, is the staffing available? Is the data available? Do the billing systems accommodate these structures and so forth? And we'll get into more detail there. And then finally, is there any effect on the revenue stability? Meaning, does it go up or down, or is it the revenue stability at any risk as a result of any of the options that we looked at? Next slide, please. So the first approach we spent some time looking at and provided feedback on was a square footage methodology. And so this would be a rate structure that uses square footage of structures, not properties, but of structures, to use as a basis in some way for calculating sewer charges. And so for the 3 criteria that we looked at, does this align with wastewater discharge characteristics? And based on our experience directly and our review of other rate structures that have been used throughout the state and throughout the country, developed by other consultants and just professional expertise and experience in general, the feeling, or not feeling, the best practice or the approach is that building size generally does not directly measure or reflect wastewater discharge. And you can imagine, the size of a building doesn't necessarily equate directly to wastewater discharge, and the size of the building doesn't necessarily directly impact occupancy, and that is independent of square footage, and it doesn't account for any measures or fixtures that are targeted towards conservation or efficient use of water and therefore wastewater discharge. So that's some of the drawbacks, if you will, of a square footage approach, a sole square footage approach. From an administrative standpoint, it does require a fair amount of data. As you might imagine, you have to have data for all of the structures within the service area of Monterey One Water, and you would have to have a new data field in the utility billing system in order to accommodate that square footage and link it to customer accounts. And so you'd have to develop and maintain that parcel square footage database and keep it, accurate and current on a going forward basis. You would have to somehow develop a policy and a procedure for updating that data for remodels, tear downs and rebuilds, accessory dwelling units, and all of those types of things. You would have to reconcile that account data to all of that parcel and structure data so that you could use that square footage information to calculate bills on an ongoing basis, and develop and implement an appeals and dispute process for customers to come to the district and ask questions and or maybe appeal their current methodology, their current square footage. From a defensibility standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, the building square footage is just not generally seen as a good indicator of wastewater discharge characteristics. And without that clear defensible correlation, there is some defensibility risk, meaning if someone were to come forward on a Prop 218 basis and challenge the notion that square footage accurately represents their wastewater flow compared to other size structures, there would be some challenge to really building up a defensible nexus and a defensible argument against that. So, but based on, as compared to a usage-based approach or a flow-based approach. Next slide, please. So the next one that we were asked to review is a methodology based on using plumbing fixtures or things like faucets and toilets and sinks and showers and other devices in structures and primarily in residential or non-residential structures that return wastewater to the sewer system and therefore are an indicator or could be an indicator of the amount of wastewater generated by different types of properties and customers. So again, looking at that alignment with wastewater discharge criteria, this is an approach that's used to calculate impact fees or capacity fees because they do represent potential peak demand for system design. In other words, if you know how many toilets are throughout a system or how many sinks are throughout a system, you could calculate the potential peak demand of wastewater flow and then size and design your system appropriately based on that potential usage. But they don't account for ongoing wastewater discharge or continuing wastewater discharge, and they don't account for, again, similar to the square footage approach, efficiency or conservation efforts and water efficient fixtures and toilets and all those kinds of things. From an administrative feasibility standpoint, typically utility billing systems are not designed to track this kind of data. You can imagine the volume of data that would be required for all of the customers throughout the system and all of their various plumbing fixtures, not just from an initial standpoint, but also going forward as remodels occur and devices and fixtures are changed out. So there's a pretty significant administrative oversight effort required to make sure that data is maintained on a consistent basis and an ongoing basis. And then again, linking that data somehow into the utility billing system in order to calculate bills. We, in our practice, and we did some review and survey, have rarely ever seen this used for recurring sewer charges that are intended to recover, the operating maintenance costs on a regular basis for operating in the system, in real time. So, it wasn't, again, just not something that we've seen for all the reasons kind of mentioned there previously. Next slide. So the other option that we looked at was a volumetric approach, meaning, somehow measuring wastewater or more commonly using water use as a proxy for measuring wastewater, that discharge to the system, and then correlating that discharge with the costs associated for each different type of customer. That does provide the strongest alignment between system use and allocating the cost to customers in a way that reflects their system use. From an administrative standpoint, it does require the collection of data and coordination of data from the water utilities who provide that water service to customers. And in Monterey One's case, as you all know, there are multiple different water providers that serve your service territory to provide them water service. And so you'd have to coordinate with all 6 of those different entities to collect that data each year to calculate charges, and then be able to link and reconcile that water use, water production data to your sewer accounts. And there's over 45,000 residential accounts alone, plus the multifamily and commercial accounts on top of that. And you would have to ensure that the billing system is configured to do all of that. And it does introduce a component of revenue variability, since sewer use can go up and down. If the volumetric use is a basis for calculating bills, then that revenue associated with volumetric wastewater charges can be variable along with that use. Next slide, please. So we took a look at, go ahead and advance next slide. We're talking about rate design and some of the rate structure recommendations that we discussed with staff. So one was to augment the current rate structure with a low use variance or exemption type of approach. So the current structure, as you know, is flat, meaning there is no variable component. It's not based on square footage. It's not based on fixture counts. But we discussed and are still exploring the possibility of adding a low use variance, where a user could apply for variance based on their low use, similar to a low income type variance. And based on how that policy is developed and how the application process is implemented and developed, we would establish criteria, and that we haven't done that yet because this is just a very high level exploration at this point. But if they met the eligibility for that variance, you could reduce their rate accordingly, depending on what we came up with after calculating that and based on the policy objectives. Next slide. So some of the considerations with that is, you'd have to define that water usage threshold. And typically, when you're using water to serve as a proxy for wastewater discharge, you use a winter quarter. In most common is February through February, because through most of California, that period is very rainy. And so the outdoor water use is limited. And when you're looking at water use data, and you can make assumptions, with certain adjustments that the bulk of the water use during those months is actually returned to the sewer system. And so you can use that to define a minimum use threshold. There's, minimum consumption history. We'd have to try and go back and develop a consumption history and pattern so that we could help establish that low use threshold. Again, we'd have to get consumption data for all the customers that apply. And so we'd have to, develop a methodology for doing that, process for doing that. And then again, the application review process and allow for periodic requalification or recertification for that discount. Here's somebody, I thought I might have heard a question jumping in, or is that just a glitch in the sound? So some of the advantages of that is it would not necessitate a full scale restructure of the rates, which is a much more exhaustive and time intensive process. It would be an adjustment to the existing structure. It would be geared towards addressing some equity concerns that there are households that do not generate much wastewater, and there's a desire to have a rate or an exemption that addresses that situation. So it since it's not a full scale restructure, there's minimal disruption, and it could be based on measurable consumption data, again assuming that's available and easy to document. Next slide, please. And then we also looked at modifying that existing flat rate structure. We can break down that single family rate into a few different categories based on data that appears to currently be available based on our initial review. If we proceeded down the path of developing a structure like this, we would obviously do a lot more detailed analysis and look at that data and then develop a way to link different size structures to their demand and use of the system. We would need to do that in a way that complies with Proposition 218, so there would be a cost-based reason based on usage statistics or standards that measure the differential demand that single-family dwellings or certain different types of multifamily dwellings place on the sewer system. And again, that would be a modification to the existing structure, the existing flat rate structure, not a wholesale change like some of the previous options that we discussed. Next slide, please. So that modified structure, kind of as I just described, it would have to, it would be more refined, and it would improve perceived equity while maintaining billing simplicity. Again, that data for some of these different size residential structures does exist, and this would improve on the current situation where uniform residential rates or flat residential rates don't necessarily reflect any differences in structural characteristics or density characteristics among housing types. And that classification, some of that data does exist within the billing system. So again, we would just have to develop analysis that demonstrates that there is some sort of causal impact based on structure size, different type structure sizes, and wastewater discharge to the system, and then allocate costs in a way that reflect that to develop different rates for those different types of different structure sizes, or structure types, I should say. Next slide, please. So just a quick wrap up, we look, based on those two rate structures in the short term here, given where we are in the process, and as Paul mentioned, we're trying to get to the potential, for the board's ability to consider updated rates within the current fiscal year for adoption. And so these two structures both are more administratively feasible and supportable than looking at a full-scale rework of the methodology into a square footage or a fixture-based approach, as we talked about some of the drawbacks of those. They do provide some incremental practical improvement over the existing structure, while continuing to allocate costs proportionally in a way that is supportable under Proposition 218 and meets those requirements. So I think with that, I believe that's the last slide. We will return it to the board for questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chris. So, what we're looking for from the board is some direction on, do we want to consider a rate structure change as he identified here? He laid out two discrete options for the rate structure we have, the modified, and then that low use variance is sort of an add-on that could be to either, if you would like to consider that. So we were hoping to get that direction once again for us to stay on track for that March board meeting, coming back to you with revenue requirements and all that good stuff.
Awesome. All right. At this time, let's take any questions that we have from the board. Please, Tom.
So I've got a question for Paul and a question for Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher alluded to the fact that our database on customer accounts contains some sort of information about the type of structure associated with that account. Can you, I presume that's not a fill in the blank prose data field. It's a drop down with certain categories. Can you relate what those categories are that are associated with each of these accounts?
So I'm actually going to ask Lindsay if it's okay to come up to the stand over here. Yeah, even though you're hiding behind Jose, so Lindsay is our customer service supervisor and has been with us a number of years and has probably the most intimate knowledge with the database and all the customer classes. So
yeah, so we already have all.
Lindsay, could you? Sorry, you have to
put it down to my height too. Yes, I was embarrassing. Okay. All right. So our category classes for residential have always been categorical out by their usage: condos, single family residences, and then multi-residences. So that's basically the way they work. So if it's a multi-resident, that would be an apartment building that has one category. Then if you live in a condo association, which could be the large building or separate condos, that has a category. And then vacant units have their own category. than residential units, which is basically everybody else has their own category. So we can identify the multi-unit and the condo unit in our system from.
So other than the commercial accounts, we have just three categories. Basically, single-family residential condos and multi
But they're all
apartments or whatever.
think.
But just those three categories.
Well, residential, there's also residential care facilities, which is basically elderly community, but there's still houses. It's not like where they're taking care of you there. You live there in your own house. And it's like condos for people 55 and above. We have a couple of those. So that's, and I don't know why we parse that out and not as multi. That happened before I started and I'm sticking to that. I don't know.
That almost sounds like it's in the amorphous commercial category, but
Yes, no,
regardless.
for
In the
the
residential.
homes, kind of.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
understand. Okay, and then I guess my follow-up question is for Mr. Fisher. If we were to ask you to do this modified based on those categories that Lindsay has just described to us, how would you go about collecting data to show a connection between the amount of wastewater they produce and costs? Because we need to be able to defend that if somebody sued us in court saying messed up our Prop 218 process. And how do you measure the output of those sorts of different categories?
Sure. Thank you, board member. We, as I kind of described earlier, we wouldn't be able to directly measure use from those different types due to limitations in, that I discussed about, to state the obvious, wastewater is not metered itself in really any place that I've seen in California, but and even the water data would be very difficult to get to use that as a proxy. We would look to, we first see, we do a quick exploration of what data is available, but more than likely we would look to state standards and published standards and best practices for different types of properties and uses, and combined with specific demographic data that we would see is available either through the California Department of Finance or government census figures, to look at density, specific density for the local area for those types of properties, and connect that together to develop. They would be assumptions. That's a fair word to use. Again, not being able to meter or directly measure, we would have to build that analysis based on assumptions. But there are wastewater structures that are built on assumptions, and those assumptions are based on, again, published standards for different types of uses throughout California.
Maybe this is a follow-up question to Paul. Presumably, there are some ways to measure wastewater discharges. Requires something akin to a meter to be installed. Would there be any appetite for actually collecting some data by some random selection of properties and putting in such measuring devices for a long enough period of time to help inform rate choices for particular categories?
We could certainly do that. It would be somewhat cost prohibitive for the data you get. So if you're looking in the categories that Lindsay talked about, a statistically valid number throughout our service area, flow metering can cost, depending on the size and all this other stuff, at least $1,000 per site per week. So if not more, depending on how much data you're looking for. They generally get data 15-second intervals. You can extend that to 15-minute intervals as well. I honestly feel, and I agree with Chris, is that we would look at generally published standards, because what we're proposing here in this modified rate is frankly, a little more granular than what we have. So to that challenge that you're saying, and we've had people talk to us last time about the inequity of a single rate for everyone. So in parsing it, I think we are getting better in terms of equity of payment for services. You can always get more. obviously. I am also, I agree with Chris, I've not come across any entity in the state, or frankly, I guess in the country, that does flow measurement on their individual wastewater services for their entire service area. It's one of those situations, and I described this earlier, we're one of the few utilities where we're not providing you something like gas or electric or anything like, or water. You're providing it to us. So it's akin to the postage stamp method is sort of what we have. A postage stamp will mail a letter across the street or to New York, same cost. So we've sort of attenuated those differences that you're alluding to in a single rate for customers. What we've done here, I think, is just try to make it more equitable and parse it out. Could we do more? Absolutely, if the board would like. It is just going to be very expensive and provide data that's going to be difficult for Chris or anyone else to grind through to come up with rates.
And then just one last follow-up question, since I've never paid a wastewater collection bill for a condo or for an apartment, am I correct in assuming that you know the number of apartments in every apartment complex, you know the number of condo units in every condo complex, and that condo complex gets a bill, that number times the same single-family rate that those of us who have single-family homes pay?
Some condos have chosen to have the HOA pay, so they get one bill. Some
So, but that bill is calculated
by unit. So if there's 50 units, it would be 50 times.
times, right?
If you're some, because the condos are owned by the individuals, some condo owners or associations chose not to pay the condo bills, and the condo owners received the bill
Directly, sure.
directly,
Sure.
just like anybody else.
But I just want to,
Apartments, that is not an issue. The owner of the apartment gets the bill for the entire bill.
and it's the number of apartments times. Do any of those apartment complexes ever get apartments split up? They started out as large apartments and all of a sudden there's a few extra apartments associated with that
But
building?
usually that happens, and then in that case, they would be categorized as an extra apartment as well as pay a capacity fee for the new unit.
And how do we find out about that when that infrequently occurs?
Usually if they're getting a building permit, in that process, they'll be sent to us prior to the building permit being issued.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Want to look at this, I understand to do this. I understand the, the principle, because mailing a stamp, mailing a letter across the street to New York, it's not inherently fair. It's worked pretty good for a post office for a couple hundred years, but still not inherently fair. But I'm not sure that we're really getting to equity if we're looking at low use and high use here. And what my concern is, so if we're going to, I'm going to take a step back before I get to this here, is if we're going to lower the rates for some folks because they're low use, we're going to have to make that up by having a little bit higher rates for others, correct?
Correct. In general, I mean, we can go into the not subsidizing different rate categories, and that's a lot of the work that the rate consultant does, but in general, yes.
So my concern is that generally in households that are a little more affluent or a lot more affluent, either way, there's fewer people living there and they're going to have lower use. And so they're going to, and plus they've got to apply, and usually those folks that way are more motivated to do it. So their rates are going to be down. And when you get into situations where people are less affluent, working people who are struggling, their homes tend to be a little more crowded. And so they're going to be paying more. And so while it's equitable in the sense of the services that we're providing around, I'm not sure it's equitable in the sense of what we're providing And well, in terms of it just being fair to people, I mean, it's like we're shifting the burden somewhat to those that are a little bit well off by doing that. And I think I would have to see more detail on some of these things that we're proposing too, like I'm going to switch it away from that to the modified, rate structure. By structures, I can visualize it, but I don't know exactly how those numbers are going to look onto there. But the low variance option, I have the concern is that it's, even I'm not sure how much we're going to give in terms of a break for people who are low use. I mean, we're talking about, again, I'm not seeing ranges here, so it's hard for me to visualize what we're looking at.
I can try to provide some context if you'd like around that. So we haven't developed the exact rate yet. And that we're sort of waiting for which direction do you want us to go from a structure perspective before we do that. However, and Chris, certainly jump in if you can correct anything I'm going to say here. But generally speaking, water, wastewater infrastructure, our rates are about 85% fixed. So whether you put a drop of water down your sink or not, Tammy and crew still need to maintain everything. We still need to have our lab. There's costs that are incurred. So that 15% is how much water you put down, and that's for electricity and chemicals and other things. So in terms of what would the discount be, we're currently at $54 per month. Maybe it's $5, maybe it's $10. I think what we looked at is 85% is much higher. That's like $48 or something like that. But to make it something that's beneficial, it's in that $5 to $10 range discount per month. It's not half. It's not anything like that. So just to provide context for what the discount may look like once it's developed.
And what about the other end?
So that's the other part is when you look at your revenue requirement, and we have 45,000 customers that are making up the bulk of it, the residentials, and then those that want to do a low use variance, of course, there's going to be an administrative fee and there's going to be some onus on you. Let's say you want to do it. You provide, as Chris pointed out, some water data to us every year. So you do have something to do. We have a low use commercial rate right now. I was told it's about 200 entity or 200 companies that take advantage of that, or not even that. Okay, so we're looking at relatively small amounts. Now, even so, you're right. If we're not collecting the revenue from these people, the rest of us will have to go up slightly.
And then that's where my concern is.
Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I was just going to add to that, Paul. Sorry to interrupt you there, Director. I can't see the names of the directors, so I'm sorry I have to refer to everybody as just director. But you have to do that within the confines of the proportionality requirements of Prop 218. So we'd have to make a cost of service finding that there is a supportable way to collect that revenue from other users based on a low use rate applied for one customer. The alternative to that, or sort of the cousin of that, is an exception or an exemption where it's just lost revenue, and that's used sometimes by water and sewer agencies throughout the state. Not real commonly because it is lost revenue, and because you can't just have a low, and I'll use this term, a low income or fixed income or that type of exemption, because the question comes up all the time about affordability of water and wastewater rates, and the desire from a policy and public facing perspective to have the ability to have a lower rate for low income, fixed income type customers. But you have to do that on a cost of service basis. You can't do it on any sort of income basis, as Prop 218 pretty specifically forbids that. And so what Paul said is correct, but we'd have to find, just want to add a little nuance to that. We'd have to find a cost of service based underpinning to support that.
Professor Church, I would just add one additional piece to it, which I have some similar concerns, and we can talk about it more on the other side of public comment. But I think it's also thinking about who's going to actually take the time to go through the process. It's going to be people that really need it, not folks that are wealthy. I don't see a lot of folks going through the annual process or requirement of having to provide the information, pay the fee, and do all this with the administrative side of it.
I just want to be clear that, and this does not take the place of our customer assistance program. That's also still out there that we'll be discussing with you in future months as well.
You know, and I can agree with that and understand that, but it still leaves the point is if you are going to offer lower rates, then the heavier users are going to pay more, and the heavy users are going to be people, residences with a lot of people in them, and that's going to be people who are, you know, renting a room, living on a couch. You know, it's just more crowded homes, or people where they're a little more in dire economic straits, and I have trouble with that.
Any other questions?
Can I actually address one other thing I didn't, Supervisor Church, was you said it's sort of hard to make a decision not understanding what a single family dwelling versus a multifamily, the difference is going to be. So currently our rate is $54 per month. We don't know what that difference is going to be between single and multi, but it's going to be relatively small. If I were to guess, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong again, would be like, you know, 56 and 54 or 53 or something. It's going to be relatively small, but instead of doing the flow monitoring to determine the characteristics, what Will Dan would do is just like he mentioned, look at the available information and standards that are out there, whether it be American Waterworks Association and things like that, to develop it. So it is relatively small, but it is an acknowledgement of the difference of a single family dwelling versus multifamily dwellings.
I'm not quite sure why we're doing it if we're talking about a couple of dollars here and there.
And that's a great question. And maybe as a framing, we should talk about this. When we went through our Prop 218 5 years ago, there was a number of low-income housing advocates that thought our rates were not equitable. So we were trying to address those comments. And that's why we're talking about this. In addition, we will look at capacity fees in the future because that's sort of a larger one-time ticket item that for people that want to build homes, low income or otherwise, we can try to make that you pay more for larger homes with more fixtures or less for smaller homes, less fixtures. And then on the variant, we had the gentleman from Salinas here talking in front of the board however many months ago. And so we were trying to think of a way, how do we address those interests and those concerns of the single person or two person in a larger home? And this variance was one way to do it. And that's why in the request of you is to provide direction to the staff on which way you'd like to go. We're trying to provide options to address concerns or interests that we've heard over the last 5 years.
And I'll just throw in, part of this came from me. I had requested with the Monterey City Council that we write a letter to M1W, but it was more focused on the capacity fees. And so why that's important, just to give a little bit of context, is for the capacity piece, if we can lower the cost that a developer has to pay, who wants to develop affordable housing, right? It creates a greater barrier of entry for them to be able to build those more affordable units. So for capacity fees, that makes sense, I think. I share some concerns as it relates to these, but again, we can talk about that more once we get to the other side here. I think I saw another hand up.
Yeah, I have to agree with Director Church. I think in theory, it sounds good, but there can be unintended consequences that we haven't really dissected yet. So I was wondering if we can come back with some numbers to better digest this information and have a better feel for how this would be impactful, because I know you threw out some numbers, but it was a range.
Yeah.
And you weren't so confident or sure on them. And I just want to make sure that we have the accurate information before we make any type of decision. So that would just be my request, just so we can thoroughly think this through.
Would that be for our current rate structure, a modified, meaning single family, multifamily, or would you also want to take a look at the variance one, low use variance as well?
Yeah.
All three.
All three, if possible. I think if we're gonna, if we talked about it, but I didn't see those numbers. Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah, they're not there.
Yeah. So,
So what, you know, I'll certainly talk to Lawrence and Chris about this. Obviously, that'll be some additional work for the consultant, and so we can amend their contract and see if that can be done prior to, if we can get it done before budget personnel or certainly by the next board meeting. But we'll huddle up and discuss that because that seems entirely reasonable.
Anybody else have questions at this point? Please.
No, just one comment on that latter, sort of a follow-up from Director Arzul. I think you're going to find that to be a fairly challenging calculation to come up with some numbers. And the reason is you've got to set some sort of qualification standards for the low use variance. And then you've got to forecast how many people will take advantage of this, because that would be a lower rate, which reduces our revenue. Then you're going to have to figure out how much that revenue reduction is. And you got to have the revenue, unless, Paul, you care to work for us for free for a couple of years. And then that would have an impact on everybody else's rates, as Director Church has pointed out. I'm just mentioning that if they don't come up with solid numbers in the next 3 weeks, we should not be surprised or disappointed.
I would also just throw out that I almost feel like we should kind of just give general direction tonight so that staff has time, because the time frame that we have here is pretty truncated. And if it's that we're not comfortable with it, then maybe we just say, let's have this come back the next time we do a rate study and be a little bit more prepared with the numbers so that we can feel comfortable in potentially making that transition occur. Please.
Maybe a silly question. So, from the presentation, square footage of building doesn't measure the water, wastewater sufficiently at that methodology?
No, it would
Is that what I heard?
just be square footage of the property.
Of the property.
Of the
unit.
structure.
Of the
That
structure.
does not measure
Of
how
the
much
building.
is kicking out.
Okay. And then you want to get away from the fixture methodology?
Well, I think
That
what
would-
the studies have shown is that the fixture count is not used for rates. It can be used for capacity fees in terms of how much wastewater can be generated in a given structure. But once again, one person in a house with 10 bathrooms doesn't generate any more than if they had one. So hence the reason it's not a good indicator of what is contributed. Same thing with square footage.
And then going to volumetric wastewater methodology on there, how would you, so I know that in Sand City, we did do something at that Marriott's Hotel. And is that, I think you're, or someone, if it's Seaside Sanitation or somebody is measuring that to get the rates. So that has been done or is in process. It's going to take a year. But with that method, do we look at with that method? So if people are irrigating or landscaping, that is going back into the groundwater basin and being percolated, right?
Mhm.
So were you talking also about, sorry to jump around, but going off of the water bill, how much water usage, and if that water is going back into the whether it's landscape, that is not going into this, going to be going into, coming back to Monterey One water.
Right. So generally speaking, when entities use volumetric on the water side, you look at the usage in, say, December, January, February, when in theory there is not outdoor watering. So water that's used is generally being put down the drain. However, those entities that you'll probably see in attachments 1 and 2 that do some of the variable rates, they're generally entities that have water and wastewater customers in their service area, so they have all that data. The reason it makes it so administratively difficult for us, there are 6 or 7 water companies to get that data for the 45,000 customers, And then there's a number that don't have a water company associated with them that have that data. So we're not under the same roof. So once again,
And I would add, Paul, I think three of those providers are private, correct? Those water providers?
Yes, which makes it that much more difficult.
Yeah, which it adds another comment. And just with the director's comment, typically large commercial entities like a Marriott will have a separate meter for irrigation and indoor use, which is not the case with residential properties, almost 100%. Very few residential properties have a separate irrigation meter unless it's an agricultural type use or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question in terms of the capacity fees. Isn't that usually it's typically split between sewer and water, right? So how does that structured? How is, in terms of basically splitting it up? How do you guys basically negotiate, who gets what in terms of the capacity fee? The one large one, everybody gets a piece of it, but how does that work?
So people actually come to us and pay us capacity fees just for sewer. And then they would go to Marina Coast Water District and pay for a capacity fee. So it's separated out based on the capacity fee nexus studies that all the entities have done.
Okay.
Which does make it a little more difficult for a developer, but
Right.
It's just the fractured nature of the utilities around here.
Can we go out to public comment and then maybe we can come back?
Sure.
I just want to make sure we get a chance to hear from them. Let's take it out to the public. Anybody in the public wish to speak on this item? Anybody on Zoom want to use the raise hand function? All right. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring it back to the committee. Director Moore.
So, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. We don't do any splitting of capacity fees because the capacity fee we are charging is a capacity fee for wastewater treatment, not wastewater collection.
Well, except for the 6 pump stations and
Yeah, for
30
the
miles
force
of main.
mains and
So, yeah.
sure, but
So the trunk system and then
trunk system and wastewater treatment, right? And then whoever collects the wastewater from your house, your city or Marine Coast, you probably do have two separate capacity charges. One to help pay, well, I guess for you all in the peninsula, you're going to pay a capacity charge, I suspect, to Cal-Am, if you ever get to build anything. And then a capacity charge to the city collection system. In that sense, it's separate. But to move us forward, correct me if I'm wrong, but relatively soon, if we stuck with just a straight flat rate as we've done for years and years, you could come up with some notional numbers. That 54 is going to go to 57 or whatever, just based on our costs and our engineers' wonderful plans for going forward, et cetera. And could you also come up with some numbers if we decided to go down the road of modified flat rate? So those different categories that sense to be described to us would have some different numbers associated. Do you think those could be put together in a timely way, even if they aren't fully vetted? Because I think that might help the board think about, as Director Church said, well, if it's only a $1 difference between different types of buildings, between apartments and condos and single family residents, maybe we shouldn't bother. But if it's a $10 difference, maybe there is something that we can say about equity in that regard. But until we get rough numbers, it's hard for us to judge.
Short answer to your question is, yeah, we can do that. The reason I was hemming and hawing, Alexis, was frankly at that low use variance one. So to do both of them with low use variance, it just adds some complexity. If we're looking at just the two base ones, I guess I would contend, and Chris, tell me if I'm wrong, if the board just provided direction going, go to the modified, and at the March board meeting, we should know our revenue requirements and therefore the proposed percent rate increase. If the consultant develops that modified, what is for a single family dwelling versus multifamily, whatever the percent increase is that we're shooting for, we could just apply it to our current rate and tell you what that is, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm just asking for, would you be able to produce some numbers for those two alternatives?
I think just doing the modified one, we could easily, I mean, we could just use the same percentage and do the fixed rate one as we
Fixed
have.
rate across all categories.
Chris, your hair isn't falling out anymore, is it? With that last statement?
I'm always, going to hedge a little bit. I think, because we'd have to talk about that and just make sure we're not, discounting something we're just not thinking about, by giving too quick an answer. But I think we should be able to provide some high level analysis, again, with the reservation that we don't have much time. And so, we want to do that quick enough so that we have enough time then to finalize and complete that in a detailed fashion and do, the review and the quality and all the things we need to do to make sure that ultimately what we move forward with is rigorously done and defensible.
And then what I would say is, at least we'll talk with the consultant and Lawrence on at least looking at the variance and what that would look like, if possible.
Anybody? Please.
Part of what I'm trying to get out of my head is, from a financial perspective, we should be incentivizing high users because it creates more source water. But I got to get that out of my head. So, Chris, my question for you is, you've done a rate study for looks like 24 other jurisdictions, and 3 of them have a combination of fixed and variable. My first question is, on those jurisdictions that you've looked at, on the fixed rate, do they take into account the modified, where they break it out by residential, multi-use? How many of those do that?
Yeah, the ones that we have that have a fixed, they do take into account different uses.
Okay, across
in
the
some
board,
cases,
then.
In some cases, and I think, like, going back to what Paul mentioned, the overwhelming majority, if not all of those, are sort of single purpose entities, meaning, one city or one special district that provides both water and sewer, which makes that analysis a lot easier, again, because in those cases where we're using fixed and variable, the variable component is based on water use, meaning we're able to get that water use data because, city X is also providing water and wastewater service. And so we're able to do a little bit finer type of analysis to get to those numbers. But yeah, the fixed charge is usually, there's a fixed charge for commercial, sometimes subcategories of commercial, one for multifamily, and then one for single family.
Okay, and that variable rate then is the usage rate that we've been talking about, those 3 jurisdictions that have that combination. Is that right?
That's right. And then it's usually based on the volume of use, and then, depending upon the categories, the strength characteristics of effluent from different users.
And would you say what makes that a little bit easier for them is that they have that single structure where they can get the data, that they don't have multiple jurisdiction or agencies?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Anybody else? All right, well, open to a motion or some additional direction to staff.
Well, do you think you have enough direction from the board? Or do you want a motion?
Go ahead and add, we live in an area that there's some people that don't even live here throughout the year. They're only here for maybe 2 months. So that low option to me would be very challenging.
So what I've been,
Water, use it.
so I did have a CFO in a past life whose motto, instead of providing cooperative water solutions, they wanted to say, turn it on and leave it on. Now, so I don't know if it suits the board, but I would go back and have a discussion with Lawrence and Chris about developing the rates under the modified flat rate structure. So we have a single family rate, a multi-dwelling rate. That revenue requirement, and I'm going to make up a number here. Let's say because of everything, we need to raise rates 8%. And so that's baked into them developing these two rates. I would just take that 8% and multiply by $54 per month. And that would be what our current rate structure would look like. And then to try to look at the variance, we'll talk to Chris and company about what would a low use variance be for the modified flat rate. And that would just give you sort of boundary conditions for these two options, if you will.
So I mean, I think that the modified flat rate structure in theory you'd create more numbers because of all the ADUs and
Absolutely.
whatnot. So then you'd have if you did have a higher number of the low variance, low volume, it would probably offset each other
A little bit.
because you went to that modified. So
Anybody else? Staff, do we feel like we have enough? Anything else needed? Oh, please, sorry about that.
That's all right. I presume all of this is heading for a possible 218.
Yes.
Just I'll just put on the table. Salinas may not be enamored with 218s.
The process or
218 at this time.
so any rate increase is what you're saying?
I'm not saying that,
Oh, okay.
but you know, just based on having gone through a relatively mild 218 in terms of cost increase,
Yeah.
and the reaction, timing may matter. I think the rates and really having some specificity is going to be really, really important. And I'm not saying that, I think I would be remiss if I didn't share with the board that there were some real, you know, the feedback was interesting. Now I understand the 218 process and how it works and
Yeah.
you know how you win the game. I got that. But there's a little more visibility on 218s at the moment. And so I think I would just be remiss if I didn't share that, and given you know, Salinas's percentage in the process, I just want to share that.
Excellent. We'll certainly discuss that. I guess
It's meant to be helpful.
I take it that way. What I was actually going to ask is I had the opportunity to talk to present at the Castroville Community Services District. When we know there's potential issues or interests of the community, I would love to touch base with each of you prior to presenting, just so I can try to address whatever I can.
Yeah, no, and I think that is important to, you know, to specifically go out to the other agencies and really build a consensus or a consolidation of information and feedback.
Yeah, excellent.
I think the point is well taken. I think people are a little bit hypersensitive to increased rates, right? We see rates going up with PG&E. We see rates going up proposed for Cal-Am. We're seeing all these rate increases and people are feeling it. And so I'm assuming that's what you're speaking to as it relates to Salinas residents.
And they're getting covered. And they're getting more visibility, and you know, and depending upon the time and the ballot it participates on, you know, I mean, we're looking at a strong likelihood of, do we want to see if we can deal with the sunset issue on Measure G sooner rather than later, you know, on one of the, you know, we all sit on different boards, and you know, one of the boards I sit on, one of our council members was at a community school meeting, and the parents, and the possibility of, and this may be a little extreme, but I think we all know the lower end of the economic spectrum, you know, and any movement, fixed income, lower, it's tough. To your point, it's cumulative. But he even said it in the context of 25 cents. That got people's attention. You know, so I think it's something to be mindful. So I think your idea of, making sure you have the opportunity to visit with the various jurisdictions, get feedback. I think it's important that there be really, really good groundwork, because I think all of us who are sitting as a council person or a mayor are just hearing very, very directly, the environment we're in. And, like the 218 that went through the last time, like, listen, we have no choice, because, they will proverbial, what will hit the fan. I'm not sure what it'll hit, but it'll hit something if we don't do this. But, this whole issue of rates and, and then when you start getting ready to anticipate capital projects, then it gets really interesting. So I think all of us feel a responsibility to being on record that, we want to be sensitive to this issue. So that's my only point.
Part of my thought, just to share with the board, is maybe just looking at the idea of sticking with the flat rate this go around. I mean, you saying this kind of almost convinces me more of that, because I think the greater complexity we add to it, it just kind of makes it hard to focus on what exactly is it that we're focusing on. And to Supervisor Church's point, people can easily make an argument that higher income individuals can benefit from a program that might create higher rates for those that have more people in a household. So I think it's worth looking into more. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm kind of leaning towards this idea of sticking with the flat rate, even though I, in a large way, was a driver of us going this way. Which I think it was helpful. It was informative. But I think the most important part out of this is, one, Paul's going to all of our boards and councils. So there's going to be an opportunity for the public within our individual jurisdictions to hear directly from our staff. And then I would just ask staff that maybe we get a one pager or a two pager or something where we can be informed as we're having conversations around the why behind this all. Specifically, this rate increase, what is it providing us? And if we don't do it, what are we losing out on? What is the impact? I think maybe providing that to the board members might be helpful towards us helping to share that and deliver that message.
Yeah, but to your point, I mean, I think the direction is rate scenarios, but it's also the how, the approach scenario. So we want to provide direct, because we're dealing with multiple agencies and multiple rate increases, and we're all wrestling with this. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die financially. and we're all wrestled with how do we meet everybody's expectations.
Well said.
And deliver the products and service that people want. So the educational approach becomes really more critical in this go around, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Please.
So I would like to advocate for maybe a little bit more than that. So we know there's a segment of the American public that, for whatever reason, doesn't have a particularly strong understanding of government across the board. And some folks in that category view anything that calls itself government as just a bunch of old guys reaching in and gals reaching into their pocket to take money over and over and over again. We're effectively a special district. Yeah, we're a JPA, but we operate like a fee for service special district. And as Mr. Fisher has pointed out, the law prevents us from taking more money out of people's pockets than absolutely necessary to provide the service that we provide. I think there's folks in the public that really don't understand that. We get lumped in with, the federal government, with the state government, with high-speed rail projects that go off the rails, no pun intended. If we can do some more solid education of our electorate and get them to understand that these costs are real costs. And most of what we buy from private industry, and that private industry is for profit, and that private industry imports stuff that's affected by tariffs. And we have no control over that. We do the best. We ask our engineers to do the best to keep our infrastructure up and running, because we definitely don't want a failure of collecting and processing your wastewater. So whatever staff can do to put on websites, put on social media, give us brochures, more detail, talk to city councils, of course, but I'd love to hear a more robust, for any time we go into these Prop 218 processes, to try and distinguish us from taxes, because that's not what we're charging a fee for service. And yes, you have to have that service, because if you don't, you're putting your wastewater in a place that puts everybody else at risk of disease and death. Anyway, we have a good amount of soapbox, good amount of discussion here. Any last minute comments before we move on? Staff, do we feel good about the direction? Maybe not, because what I said.
Yeah, not at all, because of what you said. Because what I heard initially, I thought you wanted me to develop the modified, but I think what you're saying, and it certainly resonates, is if we want to confuse the heck out of all of our ratepayers by changing our structure, as well as trying to inform and educate as best as we can at this point in time.
Well, I think what I'm is you need to hear from
everyone.
The rate, the MW1 ratepayer universe at some level.
Yes.
So you've got enough so you've got a sense of where people might be about the process, and Tom's points are well taken.
Yeah.
But that becomes, if the board votes to proceed with the 218, obviously the groundwork's got to be laid for it.
And so to that extent, like I mentioned, I did the presentation to Castroville. I think every other presentation is already scheduled. Delray Oaks is actually tomorrow night. So what I would do, and sorry I didn't do this for you guys, Ron, but just try to touch base with each of you prior to the meeting to understand what your specific interests are of your community, and try to address them as best as I can.
I can tell you mine, they don't like rate increases.
Hopefully there's something else there.
No, they really don't like rate increases.
Oh, yeah, no.
One more time.
Does something magical happen if you say it? That like press hard 3 copies and you get something? Okay.
Oh gosh. Well, why don't we just do a quick check-in with everybody and maybe do a little bit of a straw poll. There does seem to be this kind of interest of modified versus just keeping the flat rate. So who's wanting to, and is there anything else that's baked in here that I'm missing just before I capture?
That's the big question, in all honesty.
Yeah. Okay. So who's leaning towards the modified rate at this point? Anybody?
I'll look at a consideration of it, but
You're leaning.
We
We
need the information to really make a decision.
Okay. Is there a way that we can do this where it arms a future Prop 218 process the next time that the agency goes about it? So that way that information is readily available for that discussion, where we're not feeling as rushed, and it maybe could take a little bit more time for the education piece, because I'm not sensing that we have a lot of time and capacity to do all the things, which is what I'm sensing from you is probably a little bit more clear direction from us.
Yeah, I can comment. We've historically, I believe, done Prop 218 processes that cover a 5-year period. But
last time was 5-year. The one before that was a 1 year. The one before that, I think, was a 3-year. So it's varied.
It's varied, and obviously it's up to the board to decide how long. The trade-off is every time you do one of these Prop 218 processes, there's a whole bunch of overhead and costs and staff time that go with it. But we could do a 2-year, well, we could do a 5-year, but nothing says that a year down the line, we could
Do it again.
do it again. Yep. It wouldn't stop us from doing so.
100%. So it seems like we are leaning towards the direction of just keeping the flat rate. Is that fair?
For me, the hard thing is with the modified, not knowing, is there a significant difference between the three? It's.
It depends what we think is significant. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet you a bit when you look at these other ones that use multifamily and single family dwelling, it's, like I said, $54 to $50. I mean, so is $4 per month significant? So that's $48 a year.
Yeah, it's
Ballpark.
typically not a huge differential,
Small.
if that's answering your question.
Yeah.
And
I'm trying to think anecdotally of some of the recent ones.
I was just thinking about the Central Sand one, Chris, is why I was saying that percentage ballpark.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, so we're talking 54. Yeah, you might be talking, $5 to $7 difference.
would it be helpful if you had a motion?
Yes, please.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to stick with the flat rate.
Second.
All right, so moved and seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you for that. I think it was a worthwhile conversation. I don't think it wasn't worth the investment of us looking into that. So I appreciate staff and Mr. Fisher, I appreciate you and your team helping us work through this. And I think it just creates opportunity for us to continue the discussion in the future. Awesome. With that, we will move on to 11 informational items. 11A is Pure Water Monterey update, and I'll pass it to Paul.
Thank you, Chair Williamson. So, as you well know, Pure Water Monterey and expansion are up and going. In January, Tammy and her crew, have produced 612 acre feet in the month. So if you think about, okay, 612, great. If they did that same rate for the entire year, it's over 7,000 acre feet per year. So they had this plant humming. And even through a lot of the issues you've had in terms of, startup issues and things like that. So it's going well. In terms of completion, the injection well, phase 4 part of the project, the notice of completion was filed January 28th. So check. On the advanced water purification facility, the notice of completion is expected to be filed maybe later this week, hopefully by the end of next week, I would say. Some final details being worked out with the contractor. So that's exceptional news. Engineering, operations, and compliance staff submitted an optimization plan to the Division of Drinking Water last Friday. And then lastly, well, there's more than lastly, but the power from Regen to power the AWPF with the landfill gas renewable energy. Is it starting this week, the project, in terms of bringing it on over? Okay, so the switchgear replacement to prepare us to land that is starting this week. And then something that I couldn't quite wrap my head around is we're going out for procurement to replace the old membranes on the reverse osmosis and membrane facility. It's like when you buy a new car, you think it's always new. We're replacing stuff because it's 6 years old already. And we expected about 7 years out of these membranes, but we're there. So generally speaking, all good news surrounding Pure Water. A couple other quick things. February 8th and 9th, I participated in a State Water Resources Control Board and Water Research Foundation workshop at Orange County Water District, collectively trying to decide where the best use of research dollar is in the realm of potable reuse and reuse in general. There are about 35 people there from around the state and trying to distill down. The state doesn't have a whole lot of research money available. It's about $1.5 million. So trying to categorize where that can go. And then, as I mentioned, presented to the Castroville board last week. We'll be at Delray Oaks tomorrow and the rest of yours in, I think, the next 6 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that. So looking forward to seeing all your councils as well, except for some that'll probably throw things at me.
I'll be gone the week. I'll be gone the March
That
10th
week.
March 10th council meeting. Go to that one.
Okay, that's what I'm shooting for. Then
I don't like long presentations.
I'll make it short.
Any questions?
Do you have anything else?
Pure water
Oh, sorry.
just
I went right into staff reports. My
good.
bad.
I was going to say something, but you were already on your flow. So
Thank you. I appreciate you
Yeah.
letting it roll.
any questions on the pure water report out? All right. Now we can go ahead and move forward with staff reports. The
Done.
rest of the staff reports.
So we started up SVRP at the end of last month, and with the rains last week, we've been going and stopping and trying to get it going again. I guess we do have rain in the forecast a little bit more, but the main thing is we did get the state award for the large plant of the year. And so teams will be going, representatives will be going to the conference in Sacramento.
California Water Environment.
Yeah, for CWEA. I'll be on a cruise, so I won't be accepting the award. But anyway, the teams are doing great. We're real busy. This is the year for evaluations, and so everybody's finishing those to make Lyra happy. And did I miss anything, Jose? Is there anything else you you guys went to the award, the local Monterey Bay CWA awards dinner was Friday night. So would you brief us on that? Because we did receive another award, a plunger, I think.
Yes, so, yeah, like Tammy mentioned, we attended the dinner. About 12 of us attended the award ceremony for the local section. And this is really the platform that sets you up to state level. We had Katie, she's one of our newer employees working in the lab. She was recognized for time served as a volunteer because this association, especially for the local sections, a lot of it's volunteer based. And we're actually really well represented. Nate's the president for this coming year. And we have Jaren and Olivia that also participate in the board. So our agency is getting really well represented and getting ourselves much more involved because this organization does offer a lot of benefits. Aside from the conferences, they do webinars, they do lunch and learns where you can invite vendors out to your facility or provide training over lunch. So it's something really useful and beneficial for our team, especially the younger staff to get involved with. And we're heading in that right direction.
And Katie's a new addition. She is a retired annuitant that is working our weekends in the lab. And she actually has a lab background, but also an operations manager where she came from was it SoCo? Scotts Valley. So she basically ran that, and I think they had her doing both jobs. So she was ready to retire. So now we have her doing, and before we were paying overtime for our lab people on the weekends because of resources. So she's taking over the weekend work as well as the holidays. So it's a huge benefit for us. She's a great addition.
Want to give an update on the development for the next year budget. We finished the resource agency budget and get some feedback coming from WRA. So we fine-tuned the budget a little bit, and then we are still waiting for the final approval from the Board of Supervisor. And we finished the wastewater side budget, and the next phase will be developing the Pure Water Monterey budget for the Marina Coast and the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. And we anticipate this will be finished by mid-March. After that, we will present that to the board for the whole agency budget for review. In addition to that, we have a cost allocation plan meeting with all those outside agency, including Marina Coast, Water Management District, Water Resources Agency, and we get a lot of good feedback. And we are working with Wilton to schedule a follow-up meeting with each of the outside agency sometime next Friday, next Thursday. And this concludes my update.
Right. Good evening. Just two quick items from me. So the Salinas Valley Basin GSA is co-sponsoring a program called the Water Leadership Institute. It's a program that is designed to educate and inform people from underserved and underrepresented communities so that they can take a more active role in water policy and decision making. The first session occurred on January 31st, and our community liaison, Michelle Baumgardner, who's here tonight, represented Monterey One Water. So the topic of the session was, where does our water come from and where does it go? There were 50 participants with information provided in both English and Spanish with live translation via headset. So Michelle presented alongside one of our member entities, the Castroville Community Services District, and their GM, James Durbin. And a really wonderful opportunity for us to educate within our communities and really start to get back to some of the outreach that we haven't had time for in recent years. Along those lines, we also signed a contract for some social media support. Social media is a very underutilized communication channel for Monterey One Water, so please stay tuned in the coming months as we share more on the process. And in turn, we hope you will share what we're doing on social media with your constituents and followers. That's all I got, Paul.
Awesome. With that, we will move to,
Just had
apologize.
2 items. Music so quiet. As you know, under SB 827, you're now required to do financial training every 2 years. I think I heard at the last meeting that maybe local CSDA is offering a course, but I also wanted to let you know that Best and Krieger, in connection with the Regional Governmental Services Office of Financial Professionals, is offering a webinar in March. Chai has the details on that if you're interested. I know those programs are hard to find. The other thing is that your dais tonight is a Brown Act manual for you that we're under the new Brown Act provisions. We're required to provide you. So now you probably all have 2 copies, one from us and one from your agency. In this version, the yellow highlighting are all the new provisions that were added. The balance of it is obviously existing in Brown Act law. So thank you.
Awesome. Okay. With that, we'll go to board member comments and reports.
Please, just one follow-up to Mr. Gilpin's comment. So CSDA, in fact, is offering this webinar, which will meet the requirements. So if you are a member of CSDA on March 4th, it is during the day, and that is a weekday, but you can get that training knocked out over Zoom or Teams or whatever they're going to use. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Please.
I just want to thank Paul and staff and all the board members, the directors for the wonderful job that everybody's been doing with Monterey One Water. I know that I just heard, I sit on another board, Monterey Bay Air Resource Agency, and heard about another agency, wastewater agency, very close to our area who has failed, and they are in dire straits with just their machinery not being able to work, and the rain, and it's been a real mess. So I just want to say thank you, everybody, for overseeing this your agency and being able to keep everything working. Just everything. So just that we could be in some real trouble if it weren't for 218 rate studies or rate. So just thank you.
To your point, there's a lot of really expensive infrastructure that's being managed by M1W on behalf of the entire region. So the stakes are high, and I echo your kudos, particularly to staff and all the work that they do every single day. So awesome. Alrighty, with
Just
please,
one thing real
please.
quick. I just want to thank the board, the staff for the very nice card and flowers that you sent to me. You know, your kind words, your thoughts and prayers, I really, really appreciate it, and it really meant a lot. So thank you so much.
Well, you mean a lot to us, and anything that we can do to send a little bit of joy and love your way is the least that we can do. So sending lots of love to you. Alrighty. With that, we will move on to public comments on closed session items. We have one item on our closed session, which is item 15A, is conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation. Are there any members of the public that wish to make a comment on our closed session agenda item? And I'm also going to actually open it up this time too for public comment. I didn't do public comments on the informational item. So item number 11A, if there's public comment on that as well. All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead.
Chair Williams, I need to make an announcement relative to the
Please.
closed session
Oh,
item.
please.
It's based upon existing facts and circumstances. I believe there's a significant exposure to litigation against M1W. We'll discuss the facts and circumstances, but they arise out of statements that have been presented to M1W from both the City of Marina and the Marina Coast Water District, arising out of M1W's intent to submit an application to the California Coastal Commission to amend the existing CDP coastal development permit, which is associated with outfall improvements associated with the Monterey Peninsula water supply project.
So if you want to go to public comment on closed session items.
We already did.
Pardon?
We already did. I already went to public comment.
I raised my hand.
You are not a member of the public. You are a board member. So would not get to make a public comment.
Shall we step to the dais?
Um,
Can he just make fun? What do you think, Mr. Gilpin? Okay, yeah, it's public comment. I just want the board to realize that the Board of Directors of Marina Coast Water District, and I'm only speaking for the Board of Directors of Marina Coast Water District, has neither considered nor authorized the filing of any litigation against Monterey One Water in the regard that Mr. Gilpin just described. My understanding is there's been a meeting and there's some discussion between attorneys, which there may be some degree of disagreement. I've only heard from our general manager a characterization of the nature of that disagreement up to the board, but it might be useful for me to understand what Monterey One Water's council believes they've heard, because otherwise I have no idea whether the message being sent by staff at the Coast Water District is accurately getting to staff at Monterey One Water. I get when we go into closed session over this, if you're going to be talking about litigation strategy, then short, I would need to leave the room, that I get. But if there's, it seems to me, I should have a better understanding of the nature of the disagreement. And I've only heard one side.
What I think you're aware of the disagreement between the parties. I announced it, but it relates to the intended application to the Coastal Commission regarding coastal development permit. This is based on statements made by Marina Coast General Manager and its legal counsel in an open public meeting, the Recycled Water Committee meeting, and then other statements that have come to our attention through meetings with Marina Coast representatives and their legal counsels, and the City of Marina and their legal counsels. So based on those facts and circumstances, I believe there's a significant exposure of litigation to this body, which is the basis for the closed session.
So we're gonna go ahead and end it there because you made your public comment and we're kind of discussing a closed session item in open session and I don't want to go down that pathway.
yeah.
So
I get
I
that.
think with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn to closed session. Thank you, everybody.
I've
Relative responsibilities are not centralized.
All right, it's 8:29. The board is adjourned from closed session. There is no reportable action. President Williamson.
Good, meeting adjourned.